Hello everybody, what's going on? This is Andrew, and today I'm going to be looking at some cards from the new Magic set, Streets of New Capenna, that comes out soon. We're in the middle of spoiler season, so we don't have the full spoilers, but I was still looking over the cards that have been revealed so far, and trying to see what's out there, see if there are any cards that I think could be interesting to build a deck around, and actually there were a lot of cards from the Obscura guild that I wanted to talk about. So this is about a bunch of white, blue, black, which is the Obscura color combination here on New Capenna. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of cards that fit into one of a couple categories, and I'll get into those as I go through. And yeah, I'm just going to get straight into it. I was looking at some of these cards. These multicolor cards, there's one for each guild, I think are really interesting. The Obscura one here is Toulouse Clever Conductor, a 3-mana 3/1. Whenever it enters the battlefield, it connives. Connives is a new keyword. It says draw a card, then discard a card. If you discarded a non-land, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Whenever you discard one or more cards, exile them from your graveyard. And then when this thing dies, put the exiled cards into their owner's hand. So this thing lets you draw cards and then hide cards away for later, and then when it dies you get to pick up all the cards that you've discarded by conniving or looting or anything else, as long as this is on the battlefield. I think it's a really cool effect, and I think that it could be interesting either in a mono blue deck as a way to keep up your card advantage, or in like some other sort of tempo-y aggressive deck where you want to be keeping cards and looting through your deck and drawing cards. I'm thinking like a mono blue, or like the rogues deck that was kind of popular in standard a little bit ago. And then I looked at the type of this card. It's a rogue. Okay, well, a lot of the rogues cards have rotated out of standard, right? Well, not quite, actually. There's a lot of rogues cards that are still in standard. So I kind of went deep and looked up a bunch of rogues to see if there was anything that kind of bound them together. So we're going to go deep on rogues for now, and then we'll come back around. So just as a reminder, we are getting tri-lands, the cycling lands, to complete the 3-color land cycle that the Triomes from Ikoria started. Rafine's Tower is the white, blue, black one, the Obscura one. So these lands are going to help these 3-color decks work. And every color combination is also getting a charm, an instant uncommon that does one of multiple things. So Obscura Charm returns a multicolored permanent from your graveyard with mana value 3 or less to the battlefield tapped. It counters an instant or sorcery, or it destroys a creature or planeswalker with mana value 3 or less. It's a really powerful, flexible effect for 3 mana, and if you can cast this card and you're in these colors, I think you want to try to do so. So, with these two cards out of the way, the land and the charm that you want to look to play kind of if you can fit, let's get into some of the rogues that we have available in standard. Nimble Larcenist is a card from the new set that I also am really interested in playing anyways. It's a white, blue, black, flying 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, your opponent reveals their hand. You choose an artifact, instant, or sorcery from it and exile that card. You exile that card forever. This card is obviously similar to Obstructionist. This card is obviously similar to Elite Spellbinder. But Elite Spellbinder, they get to cast the card eventually. Nimble Larcenist, you could just take one of their cards and it goes away forever. Yes, it only hits artifacts, instants, and sorceries, but there are a lot of decks playing artifacts, instants, and sorceries in standard right now. And this is a 2/1 flyer. It puts pressure on your opponent, and it just happens to be a rogue. So between Nimble Larcenist and Toulouse, I was like, there's something here, right? We can fill in with rogues and see if we have something enough for rogues to do a thing. In the new set, we also get Hypnotic Grifter, a 1-mana 1/2 that you can just activate with 3 mana to connive. You draw a card, then you discard a card. That might not seem super powerful, but remember, you can do this at instant speed, so you can hold up your Obscura Charm or other counter magic or removal spells and then activate Grifter on end step to loot through your deck. And if you have Toulouse out, whenever you're discarding cards, you're just hiding them away for later, and then you can draw them when Toulouse dies eventually. I don't know if it's going to be powerful enough, but it's a rogue, and so if we want to get to a critical mass of rogues, this card could fit in. Okiba Reckoner Raid is another rogue that we might want to consider playing. It's aggressive and it puts pressure on our opponent, and it's a rogue. Merfolk Windrobber is kind of the original rogue, or the oldest rogue in the format. Whenever it does combat damage to a player, they mill a card. Then if they have 8 or more cards in their graveyard, you can sacrifice the Windrobber to draw a card. Windrobber's okay, but if we're doing anything clever with ninjutsu or things like that, having 1 mana 1/1 flyer that has some upside is pretty good. We also want to remember that Ruin Crab exists. Ruin Crab mills your opponent and can turn on things like the Merfolk Windrobber or the Soaring Thought Thief. 2 mana flash flyer, as long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, rogues get +1/+0. So Soaring Thought Thief is the kind of aggressive way that we can build this rogue's deck. Makes all of your flyers start hitting pretty hard and can end the game pretty quickly. Obscura Interceptor is a really interesting card. It's a 4 mana flash lifelink 3/1. When it enters the battlefield, it connives. When it connives this way, return up to 1 target spell to its owner's hand. So it bounces a spell. It's a flash lifelinker, and it probably comes down as a 4/2. So if you've kept your opponent's board relatively clear, this basically time walks your opponent by making their 3rd or 4th turn just worthless. And then you've got a 4/2 flash lifelinker that can just start beating. Yes, it's not a rogue, but it fits into kind of what this deck wants to be doing, I think. There are some obvious similarities to other cards that we've had that do something like this. Things kind of like Spell Queller. Obviously, Obscura Interceptor is not quite the same, but it fills a similar role where you can just play this card, get its ability, and then just start attacking with a big lifelinker. And again, it connives, so it fits into what Tolas wants you to do if you're going that way. Other cards that fit into this whole connive, tempo, aggro, rogue kind of thing that we're working on. Fairy Vandal's being reprinted. This card was kind of close to doing a thing when it was printed in Throne of Eldraine, but Throne of Eldraine was so powerful that other cards overshadowed it. I don't know if a flash flying 1/2 that just slowly grows as the game goes on is going to be worth it. But if you imagine playing this on turn 2 on your opponent's end step, untapping, and then playing Tolas to connive, you now have a 4/2 Tolas with a card under it, and you have a Fairy Vandal that's a 2/3 flyer, and any other time you get to connive, this continues to grow. So turn 2 this, turn 3 this, turn 4 Interceptor to bounce their thing. Now you have 2 cards under Tolas. You've got this is a 4/2, this is a 4/2, and this is a 3/4. It's not a bad sequence, and you've got a powerful board at the end of it. Suspicious Stowaway is a rogue that loots. So it triggers Fairy Vandal, it discards cards to Tolas, and if you need it to stop looting, it just starts drawing cards on the back. It loses rogue, but, you know, it's a powerful card that hasn't quite made the impact on standard as I would expect a card like this to, but maybe the looting and the rogue makes this card finally hit like it should. We also have cards like Glasspool Mimic. This is a rogue. It stays a rogue when it copies a thing and it's a land. It's a powerful card that might find its way in a deck like this. If we want to actually end the game, we can add cards like Nighthawk Scavenger. This card gets big really fast, especially if we're milling our opponent with Ruin Crab and Soaring Thought Thief. And then it's a Flying Death Touch lifelinker that just gets you out of a lot of jams and ends the game. As I was looking at this card, I also noticed that we got Sanguine Spy, a new vampire rogue. This card doesn't really go with the Obscura stuff, so I'm going to pause on Obscura real quick and switch over to vampires. I think that vampires are kind of cool, and the deck in Standard that the vampires have been kind of pigeonholed into is this like sacrifice style vampires deck with Voldaren Epicure, Synthesizer, Onychal Anvil, whatever. I think this card fits really nicely into that deck. You sacrifice creatures, you can put cards into your graveyard. If there are 5 or more mana values among cards in your graveyard, you can draw extra cards with this card. I think this card could fit really, really nicely into this build, or a more vampire heavy build, potentially, if you want to go that way. I think that this card has a lot going for it. And it might fit into a more creature heavy rogue build also, because you want to turn on your own graveyard stuff for potentially the Bird Assassin. Aven Heartstabber, the Bird Assassin. This thing, flying, if there are 5 or more mana values, it gets +2/+2 and has Death Touch. When it dies, you mill 2 cards and then draw a card. Again, not a rogue, but kind of goes in this like creature heavy, tempo-y, aggro-y deck that might work well with the Sanguine Spy. I'm not so sure about that, but I wanted to call out this card as being quite powerful and potentially fitting into this same kind of deck. Okay, back to rogues. The last rogue that we haven't talked about yet that definitely deserves mentioning is Zareth San the Trickster. This is a 5 mana 4/4 flash, or it basically has ninjutsu, but only for rogues. And whenever this deals combat damage to a player, you can put a permanent card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So this works well with the mill plan if we're milling their stuff or killing their stuff. And then we attack with, I don't know, like a Merfolk Windrobber. Then we can pick this up, put Zareth San into play, and then get one of their things. This strategy hasn't quite taken off, but I think it's important to remember that this card exists. This card can also reset enters the battlefield abilities. So say we played Nimble Larcenist, got its ability, then the next turn we attack with it, pick it up, get Zareth San to hit, get something, and then we can replay the Nimble Larcenist the following turn to get its enters the battlefield ability again. I don't know if this is powerful enough, but I'm looking for synergies where they exist and trying to go deep on that synergy, because sometimes those synergies are what make really, really strong Standard decks. But now I'm going to move off the synergy. That being said, I'm going to move off the synergy and just say that there are a lot of just really strong cards if you ignore their type line, right? Like I said, the Nimble Larcenist, the Obscura Charm, the Aven Heartstabber. All of these cards are good on their own and might just want to fit into white, blue, black mid-range decks. If you add in Voidrend, this can't be countered, destroy target non-land permanent, just kill anything card that got printed. I think that some decks that I've played recently actually could benefit from going into blue or going into some of these creatures to up their power level. This was a deck I just played this week. It was Misplaced Ginger's white-black aggressive mid-rangey deck. I think that if you look at this deck and think about some of the cards we've just been playing, you can see spots where some of those cards could fit in here, right? You could go more control-y and add Voidrend instead of some of the Wedding Announcements or the Paths of Peril or something like that. You could add the Nimble Larcenist at the 3-drop slot maybe instead of the Graveyard Trespasser. I think there's room to experiment and see how things go. The Obscura Interceptor, also really, really strong if you're playing to the board already. If you've got the Luminarch Aspirants and the Graveyard Trespassers, maybe you try the Obscura Interceptor instead of the Henriquez, for example. Or You look at a deck like this one, we played it a little bit ago. This was an Esper Planeswalkers deck. Again, it's got a lot of removal. Maybe some of these creatures or some of these spells could just add to the consistency and the power level of a deck like this. And that's all I'm gonna say for now. I don't like to create specific lists until we have the full spoiler and we have a better idea of exactly what's going on. But hopefully this gave you something to think about. Just talking through it has given me more to think about too. I want to start throwing together some basic lists, maybe a rogues variant, maybe just an obscura variant, maybe something with the vampires like I mentioned. I think there's a lot to do here, and there's a lot of synergies in some of these white, blue, black creature tempo-y kinds of cards, and I'm excited to explore these archetypes and see what comes out of them. That being said, that is going to be it for me for today. I hope you've enjoyed my rambling about these Obscura cards and what synergies I have found. If there are any synergies or cards that I should have mentioned but forgot to mention, please let me know. We're all kind of working together to figure out what cards go where as we play with the new set. So any advice and any conversation about what might work and what might not work is very welcome at this time. So thanks again for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you so much, and I will catch you next time.